With Indivisible of Greater Grand Rapids, and I want to welcome you to our webinar, Why County Government Matters More Than Ever. I'm joined today by one of the Kent County Commissioners, Chris Pakla. Chris, why don't you say hello to the crowd?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight.
Yep, and we've got Scott, our ever-ready technology guy, to hopefully keep all this working better than I would ever do. So thank you. So Chris and I came up with this idea. We were just chatting a couple of weeks, I guess a couple of months ago, because I go to the county meetings and I kind of watch what they're doing and be the eyes and ears for Indivisible of Greater Grand Rapids there. And got to know Chris, thought he was a really great guy. He's doing some really cool stuff with the county. And he had actually had asked me about doing a town hall event. And I said, I'd love to do that, but let's do some other stuff first. So we've done an interview, we've done an article about what's happening with the county. And this is the next step in this whole program, which is this presentation by Chris on what's happening with the county. What are some of what is the role that county government really plays? I think what we're seeing a lot of these days is just cut after cut coming from the federal government. And that's just going to put more pressure on the states and on the counties and on the cities to step up and try and fill some of these gaps. And that's going to be a big challenge. But anyway, let's get started, Chris. So why don't you do a little bit of intro and then we'll pull up your slides and we can get going.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Mary, and thanks everybody for taking time out of your busy Thursday right before Labor Day weekend to be here. My name is Chris Pakla. I am the District 19 Kent County Commissioner here in the Greater Grand Rapids area. I represent all of East Grand Rapids and then portions of Grand Rapids. So I represent Easttown, Fulton Heights, Ottawa Hills, East Hills, a little bit of Cherry Hill, and that sort of area. That if you look at a map, and this is one of the things I'll talk about tonight, but if you look at a map, all of our districts are very gerrymandered. They are extremely odd shapes. And so if you're familiar with the Hall Street Bakery sort of general vicinity, I represent the north side of Hall Street by Hall Street Bakery, but not the south side of Hall Street. But then if you go up 2 blocks south from Hall Street Bakery, my district picks back up. There's a really thin little slice right in the middle there that gets knocked out. So we have a great group of commissioners that are really dedicated to the work that we do here in Kent County, and I'll talk a little bit tonight about sort of what is that work. It's perfect timing for this conversation because we just adopted our budget today. Very exciting opportunity to talk through that. By way of some additional introduction, my background is in education, so I might get a little bit wonkish in this, but I try to get to a place where we can have lots of good clarity around messages, and that comes from my background in education. So I grew up on the east side of the state. I went to Grand Valley for undergrad. I was a math and physics major at Grand Valley when I was there, and got a secondary certification for teaching, and then graduated at a time when there were not a lot of teaching jobs, so I went down to the DC metro area for a number of years. I taught high school physics down there in Fairfax County Public Schools, all levels from conceptual physics that had absolutely no math in it to the AP calculus-based physics that gets you college credit. And while I was down there, I really got involved very heavily in sort of thinking through how do we improve systems and how do we engage in bringing people collectively together to improve those systems rather than having people just implement changes because they think they want to be change agents or because they want to, do something that gets them something on the resume. And so a couple of years into my high school teaching career, I started a PhD program in education policy at George Mason University, and went through that for a number of years. The DC metro area is a very interesting space to be researching education policy because
Especially today.
especially today, right? And it's very interesting. Some of the work that I did on my dissertation had to do with some of the grant making opportunities that are currently being cut at the federal level. There are always opportunities to improve systems, but just because a system needs to be improved, it does not necessarily mean that it needs to be totally scrapped, right? And in fact, this sort of slash and burn method that we're seeing, not just from the federal government anymore, but now from the state government, is
Mhm.
really detrimental to spaces where long-term investment creates opportunities for infrastructure to improve everybody's lives. And as an education policy person, as a former educator, I'm sure I'm a little bit biased, But education is one of those spaces where you don't get immediate gains when you invest in education. It takes 3, 5, 10, 20 years to show those improvements. And that's a hard space to be. So when we moved back to the Grand Rapids area, I wasn't ever planning to be an elected official, but I got involved locally in my city of East Grand Rapids with some work in right sizing some of our ordinances around panhandling and solicitation ordinances, and really found a place for me in taking information that I have and sharing it with the broader community, right? I find agendas and ordinances and laws to be terribly painful to read sometimes, but I can take them. I am gifted with this ability to take them and communicate them back, which I think comes from my time in education, right? When you're in a classroom, you've got 30 students or 40 students, and you have students that are at all different sorts of levels of understanding and ability to, sort of hear the message that you're saying. You have to get really good at being able to speak 3 or 4 different ways, right? And I think that skill has really led me to be a good policy communicator, and that's where I jumped into this world here. So I was a city commissioner in East Grand Rapids in 2019 until 2022. I got elected in November of 2019. I got installed as a city commissioner in December of 2019, and then the world shut down in March of 2020. So I had 3 months, 3.5 months of commissioning before we had to figure out how on earth were we going to sustain the great work that our city was doing while we had so many unknowns. And got through that, worked through that, ran for county commission in 2022 after the redistricting that happened after the 2020 census, and won that term. And then in 2024, ran for reelection, and now I have a 4-year term because the state shifted over the way that county commissions happen for elections now. So here I am, 2025. I'm a 4-year term holding county commissioner that represents a really wonderful part of our really wonderful county here. And I'm just so pleased to be here tonight to share what I can about county government.
Great. So let's get your slides pulled up. And just to let everybody know, we do have the chat room open. Becky, who you see up at the top, is kind of monitoring that chat room. So please put in your questions. When Chris is going to go through, so he's got about 14 slides or so, he's going to go through, and then we'll open it up for some questions. And we'll also tell you about an exciting event that we've got coming up next month. So take it away, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So counties are sort of this really interesting space because we exist as the middle layer of government in the state of Michigan, and in most states actually, the counties exist as sort of this pass-through space where we are acting as arms of the state, established by our state constitutions, reinforced by state statutes, but we're often doing the things that are not too dissimilar from what cities would do. We just do it in different spaces when a city is too small to do it, but the state is too big to do it. So when we think about sort of what that looks like, then, oops, sorry, I skipped a slide. Then really we're this pass-through space, right? We're implementing these state mandates. The state passes a law that says everybody must have access to this service. If a city has access to that service, if a township has access to that service, then they can implement that. If they don't, that tends to be where the county steps in. So our cities and townships are focusing on those hyper-local services, whereas the counties are focusing on the broader spaces. Kent County, just as a little bit of a snapshot, right? We are the fastest growing county in the state of Michigan. We have about 660,000 people. We are fastest growing by the number of bodies, not the percentage, but the number of bodies. And that presents some really interesting challenges, as we heard today during our budget conversation. We are sort of overseen by a 21-member board of commissioners, which is made up of 12 Republicans and 9 Democrats. That is the closest to a 50-50 split that we have ever had on the board. And for those of you that have lived here in West Michigan for quite some time, you will recognize that that is indicative of the direction that our region is headed, that we are getting closer and closer to a space where Democrats are in the majority. And despite the fact that we are having that happen, broadly speaking, across the state, we are still in the minority at the board level here. The 21-member Board of Commissioners is one of the largest elected bodies for a county government that exists in the state of Michigan. We are technically allowed to go even larger if we really needed to, but 21 members is where we are at. Oakland County actually went the opposite direction during their redistricting in 2020. But we work alongside the rest of the countywide, and I'm so sorry for that typo there. It says statewide. It was intended to be countywide. 5 elected countywide positions, which are the clerk, the county clerk, the county treasurer, the county prosecutor, the county sheriff, and the county's drain commissioner. Those districts, as I just mentioned, are drawn after the end of each census. They're drawn every 10 years in the years following the census, and they are approved by an apportionment commission, which is made up of the heads of the 2 major political parties, who are the ones that draw a map of the districts, and then a subset of those state elected countywide positions, and that would be the clerk, the treasurer, and the prosecutor. So right now, we have 12 Republicans on the board, and we have all 5 of those elected countywide positions are held by Republicans. So you can imagine that there's a reason for those gerrymandered districts
Mhm.
to exist. In fact, I was just telling the story before everybody jumped in. My district in particular, has a small strip that is cut out of the middle of it, right? I represent the north side of Hall Street, but not the south side of Hall Street over by Fuller. Our annual budget at the county level, when you combine everything together, and I'll go through a little bit in the future where we get our budget, but our budget all in every year is about $650 million. You might look at that and say that is an enormous amount of money. And it's true, it is an enormous amount of money. But we do a lot with those, and we are incredibly fiscally responsible. And that's indicated by the fact that we have a AAA bond rating. We're one of only 4 counties in the state of Michigan that has a AAA bond rating, and one of only a handful of counties across the country that have such a great fiscal responsibility history. And that means a lot, because what that means is that when we go out to borrow money for great infrastructure projects, that means that what we're doing is we're borrowing at a better rate, right? We're saving taxpayers' dollars, and by saving taxpayers' dollars, that means that we are directly contributing back to the fiscal health of our community. And of course, we all know that Kent County is growing rapidly, and we are a major hub for healthcare. We are a growing hub for education, and we are the second largest city in the state of Michigan. And so we are a growing hub for businesses here in West Michigan. Now, county services, as I mentioned, are set up as an arm of the state, and they're generally grouped into 2 large categories. And those large categories are what we call mandatory services and discretionary services. Now, mandatory services are things that are set forth in the state constitution or state statute that we must do. And those are things like we must provide for the public safety in areas that don't have their own public safety, right? So that means we have to have a sheriff's department. We must provide access to the court system. So we have 3 different kinds of court systems that are run through the state of Michigan, right? We have circuit courts, we have district courts, and we have a probate court here in West Michigan. We, of course, have federal courts as well, but from a state perspective, those 3 kinds of court systems are actually run through the county, and that's a mandatory service that we are required by the state constitution to run for our community. I also put up there things like our correctional facility. We are mandated to run elections here in West Michigan, and we have a number of mandatory services around health, things like making sure that we are testing for STDs, things that we are supporting looking at lead in homes, those kinds of things. Discretionary services are those things that we do at the county level because either no one else does it and we find it to be valuable, or we have a certain thing that has to be done here in West Michigan and we find it valuable not because it has to be done, right? But because doing so improves our way of life. And that is things like we have a park system. There's 40 plus parks throughout the state or throughout the county. We engage in a number of community development initiatives, depending on who you ask, myself included. I think we could do significantly more community development initiatives, but we do engage in a number of them. And we have some muted services around sustainability, the environment, public works, public health, those kinds of things. When we think about core services that exist inside of the county, there are a number of different categories that we can break these in. I started thinking through how might I kind of collectively pull them together. The budget lists them one way, but I think of them, amongst the categories that you see up here on the screen, right? And we've got things like the health department, the sheriff's office, the courts, Network 180, which is our community mental health facilities. Those are things under the broad category of health and safety, right? And then we've got things around infrastructure like the park system. We have a road commission here that is responsible for clearing and maintaining all of the roads in the townships. They oftentimes are contracting in with the cities when the cities might be overwhelmed with work that needs to be done. Or in the case of East Grand Rapids, right, we often have uh, work from the road commission happening right next door in Grand Rapids Township. And so there's a mutual agreement about sharing services in those spaces sometimes. And the Public Works Department, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but these are, trash collection that happens in the county. All of the trash that is generated in the county, starting next year, all of the trash generated in the county will touch a county facility. But we operate an open landfill down at the south end of the county. We maintain 3 closed landfills throughout the county, one in Kentwood, one in Sparta, and one up in Rockford. And then we have our world-class recycling facility, which is in downtown Grand Rapids, and our the only operational waste to energy incinerator that it still exists in the state of Michigan. That's down on Market Avenue. When we think about what's happening inside of the elections and the record space, right? I mean, we have a clerk that runs a really tight ship in secure elections. Our clerk, she is a Republican. Her name is Lisa Posthumus Lyons. We disagree on a number of things, but what we do agree on is the security of our elections here in Kent County. And she has been a consummate professional in making sure that we have secure elections. She actually went down to Washington a few years ago to testify about the security of elections to Congress. And the systems set up really ensure that we have those election security concerns mitigated here in the county. But her office also does things like birth certificates and marriage certificates and death certificates. I mean, I have been to her office more times than I would really like to admit to get a birth certificate for one of my 2 kids. I keep getting them and then losing them, and I'm sure that they're in a file folder somewhere. But I've been there and paid them their $5 or $10 fee a number of times for that. And then, I've been thinking through this notion of when we think about the discretionary services and we think about the way that those discretionary services are improving our community, it's really about this category of efforts that we have, which I'm calling collective action for the common good, right? There are spaces where government is really good at acting because nobody else will act or it's inefficient for others to act. And there's spaces where government is really bad at acting and probably should stay out of acting in those spaces, right? Um, when we think about where government is good at doing these things, it's about performing collective actions for the common good. And so this is around services like providing indigent defense, right? We have a number of individuals that cannot afford to have a lawyer. Just last year, you may have seen in the news that we pulled all of the indigent defense attorneys that existed in a prior system into the county government so that they can share in the resources that we have already set up, like HR systems and payroll systems, and create efficiencies so that they can do their jobs better. We have a system of friend of the court, which helps individuals that are engaging with the court system understand what's happening and engage with that in a more comfortable way. We have 2 millages that I'm highlighting right here. We have a number of millages, but 2 that I'm highlighting here as this collective action for the common good. We have an early childhood millage, which provides funding for services, interventionary services, playgroup services for young children inside of our community. We are unique in the state of Michigan in the work that we do here in the early childhood space. And we should really be proud of that. And on the other end of the timeline, we have a senior millage run by the Area Agency of Aging of West Michigan, which provides amazing in-home and support services for our aging population here in the county. And finally, under that collective action for the common good category, we have our community action group, Kent County Community Action, which does things like pass through federal funding for low-income individuals that are finding themselves in need of home repairs or utility support or other projects. Now, I mentioned that our total budget was just about $650 million. Our general fund budget are those dollars that come to us not through special millages or pass-through dollars from the state government for special purposes. So the general fund sources that you see up there on the screen, there's a lot of numbers up there, and I don't need you to pay attention to all of them. But the one thing I wanted to point out on here is that our general fund totals $254 million of the $650 million. And taxes totals about $148 million of those general funds, right? So those taxes are by and large, almost 90% of those taxes that make up our general fund are property taxes. And property taxes are, in fact, the mechanism by which the majority of county services are funded. And if you go to your property tax bill, if you Google the city that you live in or the township that you live in and type the letters BSA, you can probably find a screen that looks something like this. And you can click through and you can find the tax bill breakdown for summer 2025 and for 2024 winter, right? 2025 winter has not been assessed yet. And this is not my bill. This is some random bill. I clicked on an address in Google Maps and found a house and typed it in and got this information. So apologies if this is yours. That would be quite a coincidence. But these are all of the taxes that this particular home is paying in property taxes, right? And for reference, this is a $270,000 valued home, right? So just scale everything that you're thinking through based on $270,000 of a home. And you'll see near the top, right, we've got a lot of city millages that are there. We've got Kent ISD millages, Grand Rapids Community College, a state education tax, that school operating tax, the 18 mills is a zero there because this particular person lives in this home and has a principal residence exemption, so they don't pay that tax. But what I really want you to pay attention to is these 6 lines, right? Because these 6 lines are where the county is getting our operating funding, right? The top one is the county operating. That's that general fund budget that I talked about. And the bottom ones are what we're calling special millages, right? Or special revenue sources. And so you'll see down there, we have 5 countywide millages that are around the county, right? And those countywide millages are for the correctional facility, the senior millage. We have a veterans millage, the zoo and museum millage, which will come up for a vote next year for renewing that. And then what we call the county child development millage or the early childhood education millage. This particular person lives in Grand Rapids, so they also don't pay the KDL millage. If you live outside of Grand Rapids, you'll also pay a millage that funds the library. But those funds right there, right? You'll notice this particular household has about $2,500 of total taxes, right? But the sum of county taxes that they're paying is just under or just over $400, right? So just over 10%, maybe 15% of this person's tax bill is going to the county, right? And imagine we do all of the great work that we do with property tax revenues that are just over 15% of individual property taxes, right? And so what do we do with that? Well, our general fund expenses are categorized on the screen right here, right? And you'll see the categories there. Community and economic development is a really small section. Public Works is very small. That's a little bit misleading because Public Works has a separate fund that they get money from. But I want you to take a look at 2 things. First is public safety accounts for 40% of our general fund expenses. Now, public safety is things like the sheriff and the correctional facilities and the road patrol, right? All of those things. But it accounts for 40.3% of our general fund expenses this upcoming year, right? A $254 million budget, $102 million of our general fund is dedicated to public safety. And when you compare that to the social services and the community and economic development funds, right? 3.5% for social services and 0.6% for community and economic development, right? We hear all the time that budgets are values documents, and I will let you draw your own conclusions about where we are with our values here at the county, right?
So
Now, go ahead.
So true.
Yes. Now, this number right here is very, it's a very busy slide, right? But what I wanted to draw your attention to here is just all of the special project expenses that we end up engaging with here at the county level, right? So we're collecting monies for the zoo and for the senior millage and for the correctional millage, right? But we're also doing things like collecting money from hotels and motels, that lodging and excise tax, right? You may have heard about that last year when we raised the lodging and excise tax here in the county. And in doing so, we provided the base funding for things like the amphitheater and the soccer stadium and the proposed aquarium, right? But we also had lots of conversations around the benefit to that lodging and excise tax for our community when we start to invest in smaller venues and we start to invest in arts and cultural activities. And so this again is a very busy slide, but you can see sort of relative to everything else where we are spending the most of our special project expenses, right? Health expenses are the top there. Childcare, that's the millage that we talked about. Correctional millage, that's the jail millage that we talked about, right? And you'll see all the way at the very bottom here, our veteran services millage. That veteran services millage is 0.04 mils. Now, from here, Mary and I talked through sort of, the what we wanted to do, and we wanted to highlight some of the great work that's actually happening in the county, right? You saw sort of where our budget went, you saw the money that we adopted, and we wanted to just have some opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into some of the highlights that we've got in our county, right? And so, just going straight down this slide, we were front and center at the county level for the COVID-19 response, right? All of the health officers in the state of Michigan were the first frontline policy officers for the way that we were engaging in COVID-19. Because as I mentioned at the start of this conversation, the county governments are acting as the arm of the state. And so when the state passed statutes around what we were or were not doing during the COVID-19 pandemic, our public health officers were front and center to that. You may remember that there were some very terrible reactions to our public health officers here in the county. Adam London is our director of our Department of Health, and he was almost run off the road one time because somebody was so mad at the fact that he was enforcing the state's COVID-19 policies around requiring separation and requiring masks. And that was the kind of response that our public health workers were getting day in and day out. And they were frontline workers receiving, just the terrible ends of our humanity here. But our public health efforts also include immunization clinics that are at the public health facilities, right? We have a main facility that's down on MLK at Jefferson. But we also have other clinics throughout the county, one in the north of the county and one over at the Fuller campus, that are places where people can go to get health services, right? They are doing things that are around public health, like immunizations. We also, when we think about the work in community growth, there are three things that I wanted to bring up here. The first is that as part of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we received $120 million to invest back into our community as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA funds. And the largest single contribution that we used those ARPA funds for was in establishing a revolving loan fund whose purpose is to increase the amount of affordable housing here in Kent County. That the amount of funding that we dedicated to that was $17 million. I think it was 17.4, something like that. And we partnered with a nonprofit called IFF that brought in 2.5 times that money and established a $57 million baseline affordable housing revolving loan fund. And the intention of that is to provide access to developers that are willing to dedicate a certain number of their units to a certain percentage of the area median income for a certain period of time, right? Maybe it's, they're dedicating 20% of their units to 80% of the area median income for the next 20 years or something like that, right? And already we've had thousands of new units that are taking advantage of this affordable housing revolving loan fund that would not have been able to pencil out because we're giving them good terms on the loans, and they would have had to pay larger amounts of interest on that than we are able to give them. And they'll pay it back. This is not a grant. We're not giving them the money. They're paying it back because it's a loan fund. And so as they're paying back those interest, those funds that we loaned them with interest, that fund grows and continues to then be reinvested back into our community. And it's really one of the key things that is working with other aspects of our efforts in order to improve the affordability of housing here in Kent County. I mentioned the lodging and excise tax. That is an 8% tax on all hotel rooms that are sold in the county. So this is not a tax that you pay unless you stay at a hotel room. And those dollars are governed by state statute as to what we can use those dollars for. But we have historically used them for these mega projects that you hear about, right? They were the original funding source for the Van Andel Arena. They are the current funding source for the bonds on DeVos Place. They are the future funding source. I don't think we've started to repay any of those bonds yet, for Grand Rapids bonds that they have taken out for the amphitheater and the soccer stadium. And we also do things like fund Art Prize, and we have historically funded festival with those dollars. So we have precedent for supporting more than just these mega venues. But in increasing the amount of money that we were collecting in that, we were able to dedicate more dollars to that community growth aspect, with the notion hopefully being that in having these attractive resources here in the county, we are bringing people to the county to spend money on tourism to then reinvest back into our community. Now, I say hopefully there because a number of us are skeptical in only investing in the large scale
Mhm.
developments. We want to make sure that we are not forgetting all of the other spaces that make our communities great and rich and robust. And we will continue to push on that. The brownfield redevelopment is another tool that we have now here at the county level. We set our own up, that helps to create opportunities for developers who are working on affordable housing projects to reinvest dollars back into their community. I've already mentioned the early childhood millage and the senior millage, and I'm going to go more in depth to those in a little bit down at the bottom. But the other thing I wanted to highlight in environment is that we really have a fantastic goal in the recycling and waste transformation area, waste reduction, landfill reduction area, that is spearheaded by our Department of Public Works. Um, we are trying to reduce our landfill usage by 90% by 2030, and it's a bold goal. And I am hopeful that we can continue to make strides in that space. But that is led by our fantastic Department of Public Works that really continues to innovate in that space. We are working very heavily right now on PFAS mitigation, right? Everybody remembers here in Kent County, we were the origin of the PFAS disasters. And that PFAS mitigation and pulling PFAS out of wastewater and groundwater are two of those things that are required by state statute. We are required to mitigate PFAS, and we are getting ready to actually install some really innovative technologies at the spaces that we have within the county that will, the term is foam fractionation for anybody that really loves the science. We will take the water and we will vibrate the PFAS out of it. If you ever go up to Rockford and you see that sort of, gross foam up by the dam up there, that is PFAS that's popping out because it has been vibrated up there, right?
Mm.
And so we're going to intentionally do that, and then we'll just sort of lop off that foam at the top and go destroy it. PFAS is really hard to destroy otherwise, right? Right now, our system for PFAS mitigation is we run our water through a giant Brita filter. The carbon activated charcoal inside of that giant Brita filter sucks up the PFAS, and then we take it down to an incinerator in the state of Pennsylvania because we don't have an incinerator that can burn hot enough to destroy PFAS up here in Michigan. And then finally, we do a lot with lead testing outside of the cities of Grand Rapids and Wyoming. We do a significant amount of lead testing in homes. We work closely with local municipalities, with schools, with individuals to do testing on lead throughout the environment. So I mentioned the health department. The health department is funded through a combination of general and transfer funds. We don't have any special millages that are associated with the health department. They are providing immunizations for the community. They are looking at food safety, right? They're approving restaurants that are looking to open or operate. And we also have some really fantastic programs in maternal and fetal health, that are some of the programs that are significantly at risk from the cuts at the federal level. We've heard that those are grants that, because they focus on underserved and historically marginalized populations, they are a target for the federal government. And so we are watching that very closely to see what's going to happen at the federal level.
Chris,
Yeah,
just a point on that, because I think this is a huge concern for many of us in the community. We see these grants coming, or these cuts coming down on our safety net programs, and we know that quite a bit of this funding flows from the government through the state to our county, right?
right.
What do you want people to do about this? I mean, should we, sometimes I keep hearing, well, there's not too much we can do because, the Congress is controlled by the Republican Party and they just don't care about this sort of thing. But there other practical things um, that you think we should be doing? Is there some action we should be taking on these?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, writing to your member of Congress is very valuable. For most of us in Kent County, our member of Congress is a friendly voice, right? Not everybody, especially if you're in the north part of the county, right, or in the south part of the county, that is not a friendly voice. But for most folks in the core of the county, we have Representative Skolton that understands the impacts of federal budget cuts on these kinds of programs. Um, but I do think it's really important to identify when we have benefited from programs that are coming from federal spaces and to share those stories with folks that may not be paying as close of attention as we are here, right? We are up to, I lost my participant number. I don't know how many we're up to in the chat tonight, but the dozens of us in here are folks that are activated and ready for action and are involved in a way that other folks throughout the county and throughout our state and throughout our country are not, right? We are engaged, we are listening, we are hearing those things, and we are fired up because we know the impact that it's going to have on those of us in our community that need these services. But there are lots of folks that, whether it's capacity or interest or simply not believing that all of these terrible things that we all say are going to happen are actually going to happen, right? And so I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is find those spaces where people are acting in disbelief or not acting because they have disbelief, and to share those stories. I was at a meeting last night in Grand Rapids Township, and as I was talking about the Kent County Community Action Fund and how tenuous those funding sources are, one of the participants in the audience raised her hand and she said, "My family has directly benefited from the funding that came through Kent County Community Action. I was able to make renovations to my home that made my home safer, that reduced mold inside of my home, and saved me thousands of dollars on remediation costs and saved me and my family tens of thousands of dollars on healthcare costs that come
Mhm.
from having unsafe conditions, right? And we need to hear those stories. We need to have those stories be the front and center stories that are coming out, because we all can recognize when somebody else is hurting in our community. And I would like to still have positive beliefs that when we see a member that is hurting in our community, we will have at least an empathetic reaction to it, right? We won't necessarily jump on board immediately to say, stop what you're doing, right? But there's our shared humanity ensures that we're going to have some sort of reaction to it. And the more that those reactions can be about the negative impacts of these reduced funding opportunities at the federal level and at the state level, the more that those are going to hit somebody at home, right? They're going to hit close to home for somebody, and they're going to end up resulting in somebody shifting their mind. It might not be the person you're trying to get shift their mind, right? I mean, and that, I think that's one of the things that I've often seen in politics is when you are explaining something or you're having an argument or you're having a space where you're sort of putting something out in the ether, it might not be the group of people or the individual that you're talking to that is going to change their minds. It might be the person that hears you say those things down the road or reads your post on Facebook or reads your post on Substack that recognizes that this information is valuable because they haven't gone down that path of already making their decision about the information, right? And I think that's one of the key pieces is that we also need to think through the fact that we're not just communicating to the people that we are directly communicating to, we're communicating to anybody else that comes across our information at any point in time.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Mary, do you wanna switch to Q&A at this point in time? I mean, did you have some other questions that you wanted to or ask
Let-
anybody in
Let's
there?
let's flip to a couple of other
Yeah,
slides because I think there were a few other things that were worth
yeah, absolutely.
highlighting. Um, this Greenway project I think is really fascinating to talk a little bit about. And actually, I ran into a couple of people from the Parks Department the other day in downtown Rockford.
Yeah.
Because there's that, the purchase of additional property, right, for Millennium Park. That's pretty exciting too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Our parks department, as I mentioned, we've got 40 plus county parks and trails, everything from Millennium Park, which is sort of the core park in terms of services that we have here in Kent County, to Chief Hazy Cloud down in Caledonia, out to Lowell. We have some parks out there in Lowell, and the timeliness of this conversation around the parks is perfect because just last week we unveiled the start of the headwaters of, or maybe the origin of the Grand River Greenway project, right? And this is a conversation that folks have been having for a number of years, but the vision of it is the Grand River as a river is not the kind of river that you can traverse along from Lowell out to Lake Michigan. It's not even a river that you can actually float on the entire way because of the dam system that we have here in downtown Grand Rapids. But the idea behind the Grand River Greenway is having community groups come together with local governments to create a space where folks can enjoy the beauty and the wonder of the Grand River from Lowell and maybe even eventually beyond, right? Because the Grand River goes way beyond Lowell. But from Lowell all the way out to Lake Michigan through Kent County and through Ottawa County. And one of the things we've been doing over the course of the past few years is really assembling very piecemeal these park parcels so that we can eventually improve, starting with, just crushed stone paths and eventually maybe getting into some sort of pavement, a space for folks to be able to enjoy the wonder that is the outdoors here in Kent County. And so that's really exciting. We are nearing the completion of our funding stack for that. That's a combination. We have some federal dollars, we have some state dollars, we have our ARPA dollars from years ago. We have some local matches, and we have some private donations that have come in for that too. And it's really fantastic because we all know West Michigan, it has beautiful outdoor spaces, right? When I think through one of the main reasons why we moved back from the DC area into West Michigan, a key aspect of it is the fact that we can both have an urban environment here in downtown Grand Rapids and an outdoor, both rural and, sort of forest trail, all of those pieces environment very quickly back and forth, right? It's very quick for me to get to a park. I heard a statistic one day that said anybody that's in the city of Grand Rapids is no more than a 5-minute drive from a public green space. And
Nice.
that's fantastic, right? And that's the kind of thing that we should trumpet here in West Michigan because we have access to those kinds of resources.
Yeah.
I mentioned these two millages. I'm putting a couple of dollars to it. Ready by 5 is our early childhood millage. It's voter approved. You voted on it last year in August. If you live in Kent County, it is 0.25 mils. And what it does is it expands access to early education, home visit services, developmental screenings. It does not fund early childhood education. It funds systems around early childhood education, so it doesn't fund actually tuition for butts and seats, so to speak, right? But what it does is it makes sure that we are providing access to folks that don't otherwise have access to it for things like hearing and vision screening. There's one of the grants, it sends out an ages and stages questionnaire so that you can determine whether your child is developing in a developmentally appropriate way, right? In heavy quotes, developmentally appropriate, because there's such a range of developmental appropriateness. But we want folks to have access to that kind of information early and often and consistently so that, as the name of the millage suggests, students are ready by the time they're 5 years old to enter kindergarten, right? We have a system set up where we have universal four-year-old preschool, and then at 5 years old, students engage in kindergarten. But before that, we have no consistent systems set up to support students and their families as they're getting ready for that universal pre-K space, right? And so this Ready by 5 millage is significantly underfunded. It could double the amount of money that we collect, and we still wouldn't be able to serve everybody in the county. But every dollar that we invest in it is providing a $13 return on that. And that's that collective action for the common good model that I talked about earlier, right? The other one, and again, we just approved both of these grant appropriations, is the senior millage, Area Agency of Aging of West Michigan. It is a larger millage. It's used to do things like expand access to in-home care. We partially fund Meals on Wheels with this. We partially fund health screenings for seniors as they age in place. And I was just struck by this number that we heard last week at our operations and policy committee meeting, that this millage allows, because of all of the interconnected nature of the work that's happening with the senior millage, this allows for a $500 investment to support somebody's health needs in home that may otherwise lead to a $30,000 hospital visit,
Mhm.
right? And there are very few other spaces where you're getting that kind of ROI because, again, there are things that government is good at doing and things that government is not good at doing. And when we start to think about the scale of services that we have to be able to contract with folks that are going to visit people in home, that's the kind of thing that government is very good at doing, because that $30,000 that somebody would have to pay in a hospital visit, they might have good insurance that would pay for it, right? But then everybody else's costs to that insurance plan would probably go up at some point in
Mhm.
time because of the way the insurance happens. But they might not have insurance, or they might
Yeah.
be funded with their insurance by Medicare or Medicaid, right? And in the end, that $30,000 is going to affect everybody else in some way, right? So if we can be proactive and fund $500 for that instead of having our community have to fund $30,000, that's the great kind of return on investment that we can have. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out. My colleague Monica Sparks is listening in on this call here. Monica is on that Ready by Five millage subcommittee and sifted through the hundreds of applications that we get. This was the very first year, and it's heartbreaking. It's the very first year that the Ready by Five millage had more asks for funding than they could actually fund.
Yeah.
Right. And that just continues to show that from a community investment perspective, we are not serving everything that we possibly can with the work that we're
Yeah.
doing.
So Chris, let's go to some questions.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I just want to encourage everyone out there to, Chris is just touching on like a very few things that are just so important to our county residents. I mean, I've really gotten to know the county and the services over the last few months just because I've been monitoring what they're doing. And I mean, there are services out there for veterans, there's services out there for new mothers, there's services out there for farmers. There's services for, as he already mentioned, the seniors, the early childhood. There's programs for kids while they're in school, to make sure that they are performing at the level where you think they should be, or if you've got questions about their development. There's just so many things out there, and it really behooves all of us to learn about these services. Take some time, visit the county website, and just learn about what's going on out there, because there's probably something out there that you can take advantage of. But let's go to some questions. I've got Becky, if you can unmute yourself. Why don't you pull up a question or two from the chat?
All right, Chris, we have several questions. And one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is if you can think of an action item that people can follow up with, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Sandra wants to know, I'm wondering where the county commission stands or if they have taken any action on becoming a sanctuary county. I've emailed my commissioner, but alas, have not heard back.
Yes. So the county has two things I can say about sanctuary status. One is right now, our sheriff does not have any active engagement with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and has promised us, so we all have to sort of take a promise at the value that it is. But right now, I feel very confident in this promise, that she will not be involved in enforcing immigration law. Now, that's a little bit of a mushy answer, right? But what we have seen is the following: we have seen ICE existing here in West Michigan with no Kent County deputies supporting that. We have seen a number of years ago, 7 years ago, I think it was, ICE actually used to have a contract with the county where we would hold folks at our correctional facility for longer than we are legally required to hold them if ICE would give us a hold indicator on their arrest. And we don't do that anymore. We ended that contract in 2018, right? So from the things that I can see, although we are not titled a sanctuary county, we are doing the kinds of things from a policy perspective that are in line with sanctuary county. Now, the asterisk to that is there are a number of policy asks that have come through in those emails, like prohibiting the sheriff from signing a 287G agreement, right? That's one that we've heard a significant amount of time. And there are agencies that have done that. They have signed 287G agreements. If you go to the state of Florida, the entire Florida State Trooper organization has signed a 287G agreement. So they can act as an arm of federal law enforcement, even though they are not federal law enforcement officers, right? We don't have the ability in Michigan to tell our sheriff's department not to do that. And we have a policy in our standing rules that prohibits non-binding resolutions, right? So we can say these things on the Democratic side, but we don't control the county commission. So all we can do is continue to say those things and make our perspectives known that we will not abide by our sheriff's department cooperating with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, right? One of the other things that I'll mention on that is the sheriff's department tells us every year that they are understaffed. And so it does not make sense to me if someone is going to tell me that you need more people, but you have enough people to dedicate individuals to do somebody else's job, right? So as long as the sheriff is asking for ongoing new positions, we will continue to push back on any attempt to say that they're going to support Immigrations and Customs Enforcement.
Awesome. Okay, next question. I think we got
All right.
time maybe just for one more.
Oh, boy. All
Maybe
right.
two, maybe two.
I'll be quick with my next responses.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was an important one. So
That
I
was a
needed
good
to be a
one.
little long. Yeah.
Nancy wants to know, can you speak to the lodging tax increase and how it affects unhoused folks who find themselves having to stay in a hotel?
So anybody that receives any sort of public funding in order to support themselves at a hotel that is unhoused, they do not get impacted by this. What we would love to be working on at the county level is a level of exemption that individuals could apply for if they are unhoused, so that they would be exempted from that, right? That's sort of one of our middle term, long term goals if we were to flip the county commission. But right now, yes, if you just find yourself unhoused and you haven't applied for any public assistance, then you are paying that extra 3% tax, right? And I want to be clear. It was 5%. It is now 8%. The average hotel stay in the county is about $114. So we're talking about a $3 difference, but it's $3 every night, right? And it's $3 that somebody doesn't have if they are finding themselves in such dire straits. So that's one of our priorities, is sort of finding ways to better support those that are on the edges of our spaces as it relates to housing.
All right. Next question. This is from Cindy. She wants to know, did the county play any role in the Brownfield Transformational Three Towers project approval? City commissioners voted yes on this project earlier this year. Affordable housing component is tiny. Project is a privately owned luxury development.
That's correct. We had nothing to do with that. That did not come to the board and does not get any sort of approval from the county commission. Yeah, that's a quick answer to say no. We had nothing to do with that.
Okay.
All right.
How about one more? We have time for one more, Mary?
Yeah, one more.
All right.
One more. Let's see. About PFAS. What is the confidence level that all of the PFAS, the Wolverine, etc., has been discovered and mapped? It seems that finding more polluted areas could absorb a lot of future funding if they aren't all accounted for.
I am not somebody who likes to publicly throw around statistics or percentages, but I would say that I am about 50% confident that we have found everything, right? So that's to say not really that confident at all. You know, I'll say it this way. We don't know what the next PFAS is, right? PFAS is the thing that we know, and PFAS is the thing that we're looking for. But one of the things that concerns me about any sort of landfill, and in fact, the conversation around the siting of various county resources, right? If we know that there has ever been a dump site there, there's something that we're going to discover down the road that's going to impact our health, right? So even if we were to find all of the PFAS, I would not be comfortable with that because there'd be something else. Now we're getting really good at destroying PFAS though, and when those systems are set up and running, they're going to be really neat to watch.
I think so. I just want to ask one quick question. Artificial intelligence. we just keep hearing that this is going to completely change our lives. What sort of an impact do you think that's going to have, or will it have an impact on county services and how people get them?
Yeah, I mean, we've had very minimal conversations about this at the county, but I can tell you one hopeful space that I think AI could make a really positive impact is in our translation and language services that we have at the county level. We have access to translators because we work very closely with the court system that funds translators. But it's in a very narrow space that we have access to those translators. And so, for instance, if you spoke another language and it wasn't one of the sort of top 5 languages that are spoken in
Mhm.
Kent County, and you needed to go get a birth certificate at the clerk's office, there's a possibility tonight that they would have nobody that can understand you, and the forms that you would need to
Mhm.
fill out would not be in your native language, right? And so that's where I think we might have some opportunities to create a better community access to things is by using artificial intelligence and large language models in order to um, create efficiencies because it's inefficient to have 140
Mhm.
translators ready access at our beck and call, right? Now, that's not to say that I think they should replace translators because I've done some translation with ChatGPT and it's like 65% accurate. Right? So it always has
Yeah.
to be checked by a human. I would not like that, but I think there could be some really interesting opportunities to have some human checks and balances on that space, so that we're creating efficiencies in the system, right, rather than displacing people.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that comes to the end of our questions. I'm sure there are a lot more questions that we could be answering. So I want to share with you guys another opportunity that we're going to have. So Chris and I have talked about doing this town hall event, and we're going to do this. We've got a date set. We're still finalizing all the details that go with it. But I'm asking you all to save the date for Monday, September 22nd. This will be a Kent County Town Hall event at Fountain Street Church in the social hall. We'll probably do a social from 6:30 to 7, and then Chris has managed to corral a few of the other commissioners at the county to have them come and do a panel discussion in the church about what priorities the community, the county should be looking at. Maybe a vision for the county, right, Chris? I know there's some work being done on that, and we really, really want to have the public come. So I'm asking you all to come, invite your friends, invite people who are interested in specific social services to come to this as well, because commissioners are going to talk about maybe some ideas that they have, but the public is going to have the opportunity to ask questions, to talk about services that they'd like to see, maybe help do some prioritization as well of that. And it's a great opportunity. And when Chris and I were talking about this, I said, well, what kind of constituent research does the county do, to learn about things that people need? And he said, well, Mary, we really don't have any money for that. So I said, okay, I think we can help you with that. So we will be giving everybody the opportunity to ask more questions, prioritize. We'll give you little voting things when you come in so that you can vote on some of the things that they're discussing and throw your weight behind what you think we need as a county. So please, please plan on coming to that. Get your friends to come. If you've got friends who are involved in some of these specific issues that Chris has talked about during this presentation, invite them to come too, because we need that perspective from the organizations in our community that are out there fighting some of these social problems, and it would help to have them. I don't know, Chris, what do you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to answer Becky's reminder for me here, just in the last little bit of time, and just sort of build on this and suggest 3 things that folks can do after this meeting in order to have direct action. Right. The first is visit our website, kentcountymi.gov, because as you mentioned, Mary, at the start of our Q&A, there are dozens of departments that I didn't have time to mention today. And visiting the website gives you information about the services. It might pique some interest for you. It might make you more aware when you're starting to hear some of the cuts that are coming. from the federal budgets or from the state governments about the things that are happening locally from a services perspective, right? We have a fantastic animal shelter here in Kent County that I did not
Mhm.
even have a chance to mention except for right now, right? We have an MSU extension office that does a lot of education and support services in the agricultural space. We have a drain commissioner, right? Our drain commissioner was a big front and center piece a couple of months ago because we had a fairly large assessment because the drain commissioner is one of the most powerful elected positions inside of the county, inside of the state, actually, because they can just levy taxes on you if they deem that you need to have some improvements in your drain systems, right? And drains from the lakes and rivers perspective, right? So visit the website, get informed about the stuff that I didn't get to talk about, or dig deeper into the things I did talk about. The second thing is we are in board appointment season right now. You have a few more days if you haven't ever considered running for or putting your name in for an appointment to a board. We have dozens of county-led boards and committees and commissions that are looking for individuals right now that that your expertise or skill set or interests might align with. So consider applying for one of our many boards and committees that we have. And the third is we make it very accessible for folks to listen in to our meetings. It is less accessible to come physically to our meetings. They are at 8:30 in the mornings on alternating Tuesdays and Thursdays. Mary, treks down from her house to visit us at 8:30 on Tuesdays for the legislative for ops and policy meeting. But 8:30 in the morning is not very conducive to many folks in our community, right? But we televise all of our meetings on our YouTube channel. You can tune in live. You can watch them after the fact. You can send us messages about the kinds of things that you heard. I love listening to meetings while I'm out on a dog walk because I don't have to actively engage with it. It's not like a Zoom meeting where I'm, sort of accidentally unmuting and suddenly all of a sudden everybody's listening to my breathing as I'm walking around, right? This is just a YouTube video that I'm watching. So you can watch those things. You can hear the conversations. If you are represented by somebody that's saying something that you don't believe in, you can reach out to them and say, you said this thing. I want you to know as your constituent that I don't agree with you on that, right? So many of us up on the board don't hear from our constituents because county government is sort of not transparent in terms of knowing what we're doing, right? County government is very confusing and ethereal in a lot of spaces. And because we don't often have folks listening in, right? If you look at the number of views that exist on our YouTube channel, it's in the like low double digits mostly. It's a great service to have, but more people can and should be listening into it so that you know what we're doing. So that's it. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And I know there's another slide. I'm trying to figure out how to get to it. But we do have a lot of social media platforms. If you're not getting our Substack newsletter that comes out every Sunday morning, and usually there's a midweek one that has a deeper dive article, go to Substack, look for Indivisible Greater Grand Rapids. You can sign up for that. We're on Facebook, we're on Blue Sky, we're on Threads, we're all over the place. Watch for details of things that are coming. Chris, again, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today, and look forward to this event next month. And it's going to be great. So everyone, please help us spread the word and show up. Thanks a lot and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.